The first mistake they made was thinking he didn't belong. The second? Giving him a seat at the table. At 6:42 p.m., the Hartwell estate glowed like something out of a dream, or a finance executive's fantasy. Soft jazz spilled from invisible ceiling speakers. Champagne flutes sparkled under chandeliers the size of compact cars, and the smell of truffle oil clung to the silk dresses and tuxedos like expensive perfume. Everyone in the room had a title, an opinion on the stock market, or a degree from somewhere that cost more than a brownstone in Brooklyn, which made it all the more jarring when a boy in a faded school uniform slipped in through the side hallway, his sneakers squeaking on the marble. He held his backpack like it was made of glass, eyes scanning the polished interior like he'd stepped into a museum, not a mansion. His name was Jamal, 8 years old, thin, quiet, and observant. He wasn't supposed to be here. 5 minutes, his mother had whispered as she smuggled him in through the service entrance. Stay in the pantry, baby. Don't make a sound. Elizabeth Jones, Hartwell's housekeeper for the past 6 years, didn't want her son anywhere near this evening's gathering. But she didn't have a choice. When rent was late and the babysitter stopped answering texts, you improvised. You hoped the world looked the other way. She hadn't expected her boss to come home early, and she definitely hadn't expected Jamal to wander. He was supposed to be curled up with his book, nestled between boxes of imported caviar and steel racks of wine glasses. But Jamal was curious, and the estate's library called to him like a whisper. Inside, under a vaulted ceiling and between walnut bookshelves, stood a single table. Atop it, under a cone of light, sat a chess set, onyx and ivory, each piece hand-carved, glistening like it had a soul. Jamal stood in front of it for a long time. He didn't touch the pieces, just studied them. From behind, a voice broke the silence. "You play?" asked Mr. Hartwell. The billionaire, the tycoon, the man whose name carried weight on Wall Street and whose expressions rarely changed, except now, when his brow lifted ever so slightly. Jamal didn't blink. "Yes, sir." Hartwell leaned on his cane, amused. "Let me guess. You like the Queen." "Most kids do. All power, all range." Jamal's voice was calm. "The Queen's important. But I prefer the Najdorf variation. Sometimes the Grunfeld, and the bayonet attack, if the structure calls for it." The room tilted. Hartwell straightened. "You, what?" Jamal shrugged modestly. "Depends on your opponent, and whether they castle early." By the time the guests began filling the parlor for what the invitation had called a casual intellectual duel, a veiled reference to the chess exhibition Hartwell hosted annually, he was still thinking about that boy. "Lydia," he whispered to his wife as she approached in her floor-length gown. "I've got your opponent for tonight. Don't laugh." She did anyway, until she saw him. Jamal, now seated at the far side of the library table, his sleeves too short, collar frayed, backpack still zipped beside him like a safety net. "Who is this?" asked Lydia Carmichael. Hartwell only smiled. A challenge. The guests crowded in, half amused, half curious, crystal glasses in hand. They leaned on door frames or took seats nearby, ready to witness the night's entertainment. A Harvard-educated senator's daughter schooling a shy kid in how the world works. No one asked Jamal's name. No one asked if he wanted to play. They just assumed. Because boys like him didn't win. They didn't even compete. "I hope you know how to move the pieces," Lydia said dryly, already placing her hand on the white queen's pawn. "See, I do," Jamal replied quietly. And with that, the game began. He opened with e4. She smirked. He responded to her defense with D4. The symmetry broke. Then CXD4. Then NC3. When he reached the sixth move and pivoted into the Najdorf variation, Lydia hesitated. Just a second. Then she recovered, smiled wider but a little tighter. Cute, someone in the back muttered, wine swirling. He read a book. At move 11, she pushed too far on the king side. By 13, her light square bishop was boxed in. At 15, she paused longer than expected. No one was laughing anymore. Jamal didn't gloat. He didn't grin. His brow furrowed slightly, the way one might frown at a difficult equation. But his hands were sure, his posture upright. He wasn't trying to impress. He was playing to win. By the 18th move, Lydia reached for her wine with a shaking hand. "I'm giving you the exchange," Jamal said softly, "but you'll regret taking it." She took it anyway. By move 22, a murmur ran through the guests. Lydia's rook was pinned. Her knight was isolated. And Jamal? He leaned back for the first time, eyes lifting. "Mate in 3, he said. A silence swallowed the room whole. Lydia stared at the board, blinking. She began replaying the position. Her lips moved, calculating. The silence held. Then someone in the back whispered, "Who is this kid?" Elizabeth found him only after the game ended. She'd come rushing out of the pantry the moment she heard whispers, the moment someone said the word checkmate. She pushed through the crowd, breath caught in her throat. There he was, standing beside Lydia's empty seat, quietly gathering the chess pieces back into their velvet pouch. The room still held that buzzing silence of disbelief. And then, applause. One guest started it, then another. Not polite claps, earnest ones. Mr. Hartwell approached Jamal and offered his hand. "I think," he said with a smile, "we need to get you a real board." And that's when the man in the gray coat stepped forward from the corner. "Shadow Knight 23?" he asked. Jamal turned, unsure. "Yes, sir." The man blinked, stunned. "I run the New York Chess Academy. My top student lost to someone online last month. 3 games in a row. Same name." Jamal nodded once and smiled for the first time that night. Elizabeth reached for his hand. "Baby," she whispered, tears in her voice. "You weren't supposed to." "I know," Jamal interrupted. "You didn't want me to embarrass you." "No." Her voice cracked. "I didn't want them to treat you like furniture." He squeezed her hand. "They didn't," he said simply. He looked back toward the board. "They saw me. And for the first time in a long time, so did she." The next morning, Elizabeth was summoned. Not by the manager, not by the cleaning supervisor, but by Mr. Hartwell himself. She didn't even know he knew her name. The butler's knock on the laundry room door was brisk and formal. Mr. Hartwell would like a word. Now. Elizabeth wiped her hands on her apron. She wasn't sure what to expect. A reprimand for letting her son wander into the party. A warning, a dismissal. What she didn't expect was to find her son seated at the chess table again. This time with a fresh, leather-bound notebook and a pen with gold trim beside him. Hartwell stood nearby, sipping coffee. "Elizabeth?" he said, not unkindly. "Your son surprised us last night." She nodded, unsure where this was going. "Did you teach him?" he asked. She laughed softly. "Sir, I work 14 hours a day and barely have time to teach him how to warm up leftovers. Everything he knows, he taught himself. Online. At the library." Hartwell turned toward Jamal, who was sketching an endgame diagram with surgical focus. "He's not just good," he said. "He's trained." Elizabeth felt her throat tighten. "Sir, with respect, Jamal is just a little boy, and people don't like it when little boys like him are too smart." Hartwell raised an eyebrow. "People." She didn't look away. "People like your people." There it was. No silk wrapping, no soft language, just truth. To her surprise, Hartwell didn't get angry. He sighed, then said something she never expected to hear. How would he feel about playing at the Met tomorrow? Elizabeth froze. "The Metropolitan Chess Invitational," he clarified. "It's an exhibition, private but prestigious. The best prep school players, Ivy League legacies, and the occasional prodigy." Her stomach dropped. "You want to put him on display?" "I want to see what happens when someone who shouldn't be allowed in the room dominates the board." She opened her mouth, closed it again. "You'll be paid for the time off," Hartwell added, "and we'll cover transportation." Jamal looked up. His eyes were bright. "I want to play." Elizabeth looked from him to Hartwell, heart pounding. It felt like a trap, but she couldn't say no. Not when the world was finally listening. The next evening, the Metropolitan Chess Invitational looked exactly like she'd imagined it would. Marble floors, Latin mottos etched into gold plaques, tuxedoed teenagers being fawned over by board members and trust fund advisors. Elizabeth adjusted Jamal's collar and whispered, "You don't have to do this." "I want to," he said. He wasn't smiling. He was focused. The pair entered a grand salon where boards were already set up, each table with velvet ropes around it, like sacred altars. An announcer welcomed the guests, then added, almost like a footnote, "And, in a rare addition, Mr. Jamal Jones, representing no institution, will join us at board 4." There was a pause. A murmur. Some chuckled. A boy in a St. George Academy blazer leaned toward his opponent and muttered, "Well, that'll be quick." Jamal took his seat across from a tall, pale-skinned kid with slicked-back hair and an attitude sharp enough to cut glass. "Do you know how the night moves, little man?" he sneered. Jamal said nothing. The clock started, and Jamal opened with the King's Indian attack. Again, again, again. 6 rounds. 6 wins. By the third, people stopped laughing. By the fifth, they started filming. By the sixth, he was surrounded. A circle of suits and pearls and privilege, watching in silence as a boy from nowhere dismantled their best players like they were toy soldiers. At the final board, a girl with a Yale pin on her collar leaned across and whispered, "You're not supposed to be this good." Jamal finally smiled. "Neither are you." She blundered by move 16. After the final round, an older man approached with a heavy-set briefcase and a clipboard. "Edward Langston," he said, shaking Elizabeth's hand. "National Scholastic Chess Federation." "Is this a joke?" she asked cautiously. "No, ma'am," he said, handing her a card. "We'd like to sponsor Jamal for the Junior Nationals next month. All expenses covered, coaching, travel, tournament fees." Elizabeth blinked. I don't know what to say." Langston smiled. "Say yes. The rest we'll handle." But behind the applause and the offers, something darker stirred. Not everyone was happy. Not everyone was impressed. And some were already preparing to pull the ladder back up. That night, on the train ride home, Jamal was quiet. He didn't play with his phone, didn't read. He just looked out the window, thoughtful. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked softly. Elizabeth looked up from her purse. What do you mean? They didn't clap the same way for me. She swallowed. They never do, baby. Why not? She exhaled. Because it's easier for people to cheer for someone who looks like their son. He thought about that, then asked, but if I win enough, will they have to? She turned to him and said the only thing that felt honest. They won't have to, Jamal. But some of them will want to, and the rest, you'll beat them anyway. 3 days later, a letter arrived. It wasn't a sponsorship. It was a complaint, filed anonymously with the Scholastic Chess Committee, accusing Jamal of cheating, claiming he used a hidden earpiece, claiming his ratings didn't match his performance, claiming he was a risky candidate for fair competition. Elizabeth read it 3 times before folding it in half. Jamal read it once, then said nothing. For hours. The next week, Hartwell called them back to the estate. I'm pulling strings, he told them. This won't stand. Elizabeth hesitated. Do you think it'll work? Hartwell gave a hard smile. It will, because I won't let them bury this kid under their fear. Then he turned to Jamal. But you'll need to play again. Jamal's voice was soft, but unshaken. Who? Hartwell's smile widened. Lydia Carmichael. Elizabeth blinked. The senator's daughter? Hartwell nodded. She wants a rematch, publicly, to reclaim her honor. But what she really wants, he looked directly at Jamal, is to put you back in your place. Elizabeth bristled. Well, we're not playing into their narrative. Hartwell nodded. You're not. He is. And this time, it's going to be televised. The rematch was held at the New York Institute of Art and Culture. Broadcast live online, an audience of over 300 in the room, and tens of thousands more watching on livestream. Lydia arrived in a custom silk suit, surrounded by cameras and whispers. Jamal arrived in his Sunday best, polished shoes, pressed shirt, and the same backpack he'd carried that first night. Reporters swarmed. One of them asked, How does it feel, Jamal, being the underdog again? He paused, then replied, I'm not the underdog. I'm the player. The match began. Lydia played aggressively. She leaned forward after every move, staring hard at the board, trying to force dominance through eye contact. Jamal stayed still. He didn't fidget. He didn't speak. He just played, precise, strategic, patient. At move 24, she overextended. At move 27, he sacrificed a bishop. At move 31, he forced a fork. By move 35, mate in 5, Jamal said calmly. Lydia blinked. No, it's not, she whispered. He didn't respond. He just waited. She made her move, and then saw it. The slow collapse. The trap she'd walked into herself. And as she reached for her king, preparing to tip it, a single clap broke the silence. Then another. Then the whole room erupted. This time, it was for him. All of it. Backstage, a new face approached. A tall woman with salt and pepper hair and an earpiece. Mrs. Jones? Jamal? They turned. I'm from the World Youth Chess Council, she said. We'd like to invite Jamal to the global qualifiers in Geneva. Elizabeth's knees almost buckled. Jamal just blinked, then nodded. Okay. Later that night, long after the applause had faded, Elizabeth sat at the kitchen table, her hands around a mug of tea that had gone cold hours ago. Jamal came in quietly and sat beside her. I thought they'd hate me more, he said. She looked at him. They do, baby. He smiled faintly. But now they know I'm better. She nodded. And they'll try harder next time. He leaned against her shoulder. They can try, he whispered. But I'll still win. And in that moment, she realized something. Jamal didn't need a system to validate him. He needed a board and a chance. The conference room at the National Chess Federation headquarters was cold. Not temperature-wise, just cold in spirit. The kind of sterile, glass-walled room where decisions were made behind smiles and legal clauses. Elizabeth Jones sat at one end of the long mahogany table, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Jamal sat beside her, backpack under his feet, calm as ever, but with that slight furrow between his brows that only appeared when he was thinking 5 moves ahead. Across from them sat 3 board members, 2 men in tailored suits, and 1 woman with a pearl pin on her blazer that screamed old money. "We appreciate you coming in," the woman began, voice saccharine but clipped. "This is not a disciplinary hearing, just a clarification session." Elizabeth said nothing. She'd seen too many clarifications that ended in doors closing. The man to her right slid a tablet across the table. There were several irregularities flagged by our software during Jamal's match against Ms. Carmichael. Jamal didn't flinch. "What kind of irregularities?" Elizabeth asked sharply. The man cleared his throat. "Unusually consistent play. High-level openings and responses beyond what we've seen in players of his age or ranking." Elizabeth narrowed her eyes. "So, being good is now a violation?" "No one is accusing him directly," the woman said smoothly. "But there are concerns. You have to understand, when someone appears out of nowhere and defeats top-ranked students." Her voice trailed off. She didn't have to finish the sentence. "It makes people uncomfortable." That's what she meant. That's what she didn't say. Jamal finally spoke. "I didn't cheat." His voice was even, unapologetic. The third board member leaned forward. "Then how do you explain a rating jump from 1320 to 2,100 in 3 months?" Jamal shrugged. "I play online. A lot. People underestimate me. They don't anymore." The woman exchanged a glance with her colleagues. "Shadow Knight 23, she said. "That's your handle?" Jamal nodded. "We traced that account. Its IP is registered at a public library." "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "My mom couldn't afford internet for a while. I'd walk 2 miles after school to use the computers there." The room went still. For a moment, even the board members looked human. Then the moment passed. "I'm afraid," the woman continued, voice tightening, "that until we complete a full investigation, we'll be placing a hold on Jamal's participation in the Geneva qualifiers." Elizabeth's breath caught. "You're disqualifying him?" "Temporarily," she replied. "Pending review." "And how long does that take?" 6 to 8 months. Elizabeth stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "By then, the tournament's over. I understand this is disappointing. You don't understand anything." Her voice cracked, not with fear, but rage. "You see a black boy win and assume it's a fluke. You don't ask how many hours he studied, how many nights he stayed up on a library floor learning strategies your children had tutors for." The man on the right cleared his throat. "Mrs. Jones, let's stay civil." Jamal rose to his feet. "Can I show you something?" The board members blinked. "What?" the woman asked. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a weathered notebook. Pages were filled with diagrams, hand-drawn boards, annotated games. This is everything I've ever played, every opening I studied, every match I lost, and why. He placed it gently on the table. No computer, no shortcuts, just time. No one spoke. Then the door opened, and Mr. Hartwell walked in, uninvited, wearing a dark gray suit and an expression that silenced the room. "Apologies for the interruption," he said smoothly, "but I believe I still fund 40% of this institution's annual budget." The board members shifted in their seats. "Jamal is not only the best player you've seen in a decade," he continued. "He's proof that talent doesn't need a trust fund. And if this council refuses to support him..." He reached into his coat and placed a folder on the table. "We'll go public." Inside were emails, letters, donations from wealthy donors asking to keep the game exclusive, complaints about undesirable media attention. A photo of Lydia Carmichael's father, Senator Richard Carmichael, whispering into the ear of the same board member who signed Jamal's suspension. "You thought the game was yours," Hartwell said quietly. "It never was." That night, Jamal sat on the roof of their building, legs dangling off the ledge, eyes on the sky. Elizabeth joined him, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "They backed down," she whispered. "You're reinstated." He didn't move. "Jamal," she said, placing a hand on his back. "Did you hear me?" "I did." He was quiet for a beat. Then, "Why do I have to fight so hard to be seen?" She closed her eyes. "I don't have a good answer, baby. Just the truth." He nodded, lips tight, then turned to her. "Can we go to Geneva?" She smiled softly. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to Geneva." 3 weeks later, in the polished halls of the World Youth Chess Arena, Jamal sat across from a 12-year-old from Kazakhstan, ranked first in the world. Reporters crowded the glass. Cameras rolled. No one smiled. No one expected him to win. But Jamal had been underestimated before, and that had always been their mistake. He reached for the white pawn and pushed it forward. E4. Game on.